told them to effectively F off. I want to bring in my man, though, Jeremy Kuzmarov. How you doing this morning? Wait a minute, 1 second, Jeremy. I want to get the audio right. I take out echo canceling because it's this weird effect where the volume goes all over the place if I have it on, and I don't necessarily want to know when I'm by myself. How you doing, Jeremy? You doing okay this morning?
Yes, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing okay. By the way, where are you located? Where in part of the world?
Uh, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, okay, okay. So, so you are an hour behind me. So it's 8 o'clock for you. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining me, man. Jeremy Kuzmarov, he is managing editor for Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. I always appreciate talking to you, Jeremy. I always learn something new in these conversations. I have to ask, Garland, it basically said you must ask Jeremy about Epstein. The files that were released were nothing burger. Nothing came out of those files that wasn't already known to the American public. Go into Epstein for me. Why is he significant in regards to, let's say, his name is often brought up on issues of intelligence, Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence. There's a belief that he was running honeypots in order to hold and have information on people who Israel or the CIA wanted to target. What's true about all of this? Go into it for me.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I believe the media leaves that out, that he's intelligence, and that this was an intelligence operation, exactly as you say, connected with the Israeli and CIA, and that this was a honeypot trap to get powerful people, because there were cameras everywhere in his house, and all of this was recorded. So what would the purpose of recording? If you're committing a crime, you don't want to record yourself and incriminate yourself. It's because it was designed to, and that's how power often is wielded. I think, people don't always understand that. And if you go back in the history, look, why was J. Edgar Hoover so powerful? Because he had files on everybody, and that means all the powerful people. And he knew about all their sexual transgressions, the Kennedys. And now the new documents. It's expected that the new documents that will be released on the JFK assassination will implicate Hoover, and it's already known he had involvement in that. And Hoover was allied with Lyndon Johnson, and they had the goods on Kennedy and all their sexual transgressions, but the Kennedys also had their own surveillance network, and they had the goods on. And they had a lot of journalists in their pocket, and they had the goods on Lyndon Johnson. There was a bit of rivalry between Johnson, and Johnson was allied with Hoover, and they hated the Kennedys, both of them. And the Kennedys maybe were going to both fire Johnson and Hoover, and that's why they struck back together. I think the evidence will show that. So it relates to Epstein because it's the same kind of modus operandi of the power elite. They get they spy on them. They get all the goods, all the dark secrets, and they set them up for crimes. They set them up with these young girls. They lure them to this island or to wherever Epstein, his fancy homes and these fancy parties with these beautiful young women, and maybe they make them look a bit older so they don't realize they're minors, and then they're set up, and then they can blackmail them, and they can use that either to destroy them or to threaten to destroy them and keep them loyal, and that's why you see a little dissent. You don't see any political figure speaking out on these horrible policies because they know they'll be ruined. That they have, they've committed crime. Not only will their careers be ruined, but they'll be publicly humiliated. If this is ever leaked, and they'll go to jail. So that keeps them quiet and obedient.
Do you have any expectation that anything is going to come out of these files? Pam Bondi is effectively saying she's been duped, that there have been thousands of files that weren't released, that there's more evidence, more information. People felt like this was a nothing burger. And again, we need to put this in context, right? Like, I'm not basing this off of out of the blue. I'm basing this off of what I've been told in the media narrative about Epstein. The media narrative doesn't quite make sense. They're saying that this man was an apex pervert, apex pedophile, even to the point of having his own Allen, where he would take people to that Allen so they can hook up with kids. That's their narrative. That is, that is what media says. And so my first thing years ago was like, where are the Johns? If that's true, and if I accept that it's true, fair enough. You're prosecuting the guy, so fair enough. I accept that on some level it's true. Where are the litany of Johns? Where are the parade of fools and pedophiles that were working with Epstein, going to the Allen with Epstein, if indeed he is who you say he is? And once he died, the story just went away. I said, what the hell? How does that work? Like, so many people like me, certain people in MAGA, certain people who just care about the fact that, or have an interest in the lifestyles of the rich and famous and some of the horrible things that they may do, are like, okay, how are you not giving us the list of criminals that was working with Epstein? And it seems that that is being buried. Even now, even with the notion we're releasing the files, that part seems to be buried. That is the only operative part that people really care about.
Well, think this is a limited hangout. It's the CIA is expert at this, or deep state or whatever powerful agencies, and that they'll leak a certain information to give the illusion of transparency and we're coming clean, but really they're bearing the real dark stuff, the real incriminating material. So just to give the illusion of transparency, and I think we'll probably see that with the King and JFK and assassination file that they're claimed to be leaking, but I think they're going to still keep secret some of the most incriminating stuff. And they're just kind of leaking small tidbits. Although in that case, it's been so many years, and there have been many researchers who devoted years and years of study, and I think they've uncovered the truth. But they're in books that are kind of on off print or small presses, so they don't get that publicity. Because the King family lawyer William Pepper was a remarkable man who really got to the truth of that. So I think anybody who's read or followed what William Pepper uncovered, I think already knows most of the story. And James Earl Ray's brother came out with a book that was very revealing about how James Earl Ray was set up as a patsy. So that they may only release like some small tidbits in the King assassination, but the truth has already gotten out there, but they keep that suppressed because they attack, like William Pepper recently passed away, and they attacked him. And even in his obituary, I mean, this guy had a remarkable career, and he was the King family lawyer and did amazing research and unearthed these witnesses from years ago and revealed all this stuff and wrote 3 books about it. But they attacked him in his obituary as a conspiracy theorist, and they just slung mud at him in the guy's obituary. And that's how the elite operate. They smear the real investigator and truth tellers so that the broad public, just thinks negatively of them,
Yeah.
or their work doesn't get out there. So these things they're releasing is just it's a limited hangout.
Let me ask you this: what is the truth about Epstein? If somebody needed to, aside from the way the media talks about it, aside from anything else, based upon your take on this, your research into this, what is the
Well,
truth?
I mean, I don't know everything. I don't know the full truth. There's probably darker
Yeah,
layer
of
than
course.
I know, but from what has come out, and there are some whistleblowers, and there's evidence that would indicate that Epstein was part of an intelligence operation, like I was describing, and
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. He wasn't just some rogue, bad, guy, bad pedophile. He was working as part of a corrupt apparatus that carries out these criminal activities and uses blackmail and sets people up in sexual crime to control them. And a lot
Yeah.
of our political class are controlled because of that. I mean, they are unethical to start with, in that they would easily succumb to it. I mean, if I was in that environment, I would say no. I'm not going to go with a
Oh,
young
you say
girl,
that. You
but
say that, Jeremy. You say that.
but these people seem to lack morality in all areas of their life, so they're easy to control.
Yeah.
They
I
they
mean,
have no what's the word, self restraint
it
or
is it is hard to get to that position without being that way. I mean, and
Yeah.
I kind of look at it as, I guess you make so many compromises to even get to where you are that your moral compass is, just screwed. Um, Give me your take on the negotiations taking place. I guess they're in Riyadh now, or yesterday anyway. What do you think these negotiations are actually trying to accomplish? I mean, Donald Trump is saying all sorts of stuff, but Trump always says all sorts of stuff, right? He is. You almost have to chart what he says on a graph and then just kind of plot a line and says, okay, this is the middle of what he's saying, so I just go with that. What What do you think the ultimate negotiation is that's taking place between the U.S. and Russia? Apparently, Trump re reauthorized sanctions. Now, this may not matter because these can be removed as easily as they've been put on. So I don't really care about this one way or the other. But what do you think the ultimate dialogue is? I know they're talking about embassies and stuff like that, but I would imagine these conversations are much larger than that.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have all the answers. Now, Trump, well, firstly, yeah, I mean, he is a clever politician, and in a way, a con man. I mean, look at his first term. He kind of sold a bag of goods to the public in his first term that he was, going to restore relation with Russia, and they
Yeah.
attacked him. The liberal media attacked him for having this bromance with Putin. But yet, really, there was more continuity in U.S. foreign policy under him, certainly vis-a-vis Russia. If you compare him to Obama, he ratcheted up. Obama initiated the Maidan coup and started selling copious arms sales to Ukrainians. But the Trump administration upped the ante by selling Javelin anti-tank missiles and tore
Yep.
up these arms control agreements. So, I mean, he talks a game, but does he deliver? So, yeah, if he's reimposing sanctions, and I mean, on one hand, this is a good thing that there's dialogue, and he's made certain statements to challenge the dominant narrative about the Ukraine war that a lot of people have already become very skeptical about. And that's, I think, part of his appeal because he packages himself as he's going up against the deep state and he's challenging the warfare state. And the public has tired about Ukraine. They've given hundreds of billions of dollars and they not see a return on their money. And I think the American public wants to see an end to this conflict. But will Trump deliver is the question. What kind of term will he offer the Russian that they can accept? Now, I do think there are people surrounding Trump, and one is Eldridge Colby, who is William Colby's CIA director grandson, who actually their view is that China is the great threat to U.S. global power, and that they want to, what was a disturbing aspect of the Biden Obama especially policy was to draw Russia into the arms of China and a kind of axis against the United States that could undercut U.S. global hegemony. So they would like to lure back Russia into the American fold and weaken the Russia China alliance. And they see that as a key to revitalizing U.S. global power and then confronting the challenge of China. I think that's the thinking of Eldridge Colby, who's quite high now in the Pentagon, and some other people surrounding Trump. So I think there's that vision that would push for a settlement of the conflict and a reinvigoration of U.S. Russian relations, which I think is a positive, even if I don't necessarily share their overall worldview. I hope for that outcome. So I think it is a possibility, and some of the statements that Trump's second term will be different from the first term. And some of Trump's statements are much more strident and strong against Zelensky. Although he has been, I saw yesterday he backtracked when he called Zelensky a dictator and said he started the war, and then he's like, "Did I say that?" So he's maybe somebody's also pressuring him. I mean, he may be. There are other views. This Colby view is one faction. Don't forget, there's always rivalries and differing visions among the elite. So which one will prevail? In Trump's circle, there may be others who want to continue the kind of low intensity conflict and bleed the Russians, who still see Russia as a threat to the United States. I mean, I think the strategy has been to just try and bleed them in Ukraine, harm their economy through sanctions. bog them down in Ukraine, and so they can't intervene elsewhere and just weaken them, and that will enable U.S. Dominance in Central Asia. There are a lot of the neocon believe that, and there's still a lot of neocons in the foreign policy orbit around Trump. So whether the Colby vision or the neocon prevail, we'll see.
What do you make of I mean, these talks lasted for 6 hours. That is that is significant on its face, just for the time frame. But when they broke the talks, they didn't really make any statements. Like, it wasn't like, here's a communique of the conversations that we've had, and this is what we discussed, and this is what we agreed upon. They didn't do that. They did agree to further talks, which is, again, good. What do you make of not having a statement after the fact? I mean, is that in and of itself significant? And I get we're reading tea leaves, and we may be reading too much into it. But every other meeting, they seem ebullient. They talked about, we're going into other meetings. This is significant. We made progress on this front. On this one, you spend 6 hours talking to somebody and come out without an explanation of what you talked about and what you've agreed upon in those 6 hours in furtherance of further talks. That seems weird to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think this is also very politically sensitive. So I think they're maybe unsure exactly what message they should present to the public. And don't forget, Trump has been constantly attacked for engaging in any kind of dialogue or negotiation. He's been attacked, as a Putin lover and having a bromance with Putin, and so I mean, he is weary of those kinds of attacks. So I think his team is very careful about what message they want to come across, and be sure, that the deal they're pushing for with the Russians is one they can sell to the American public. So that there could be that aspect on the American side. I don't know as much on the Russian side what their motives are.
Interesting. Can we go into Keir Starmer for a bit? Okay. Starmer and Macron come to the U.S., both working together, are trying to get the United States to agree to this military backstop in Ukraine. Trump, over and over again, effectively says, A, no NATO for Ukraine, and B, I am not going to put American troops as a backstop for you idiots putting in peacekeepers, quote unquote, into Ukraine. If you do it, you're on your own. Now, he makes this point clear when he turns to Starmer and said, well, wait a minute, you can fight the Russians by yourself, right? And everybody in the room laughs, which is a level of humiliation that is hard to wrap your head around when the punchline of a joke is your own weakness and inability to do the thing that you effectively want to do. I'm going to play this, but I want to get your take on the meeting. I'm going to play this just because it's funny to me. That's purely my only reason. But this is the clip.
Between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
all right, one or two more.
His soul left his body in that question. You can fight the Russians by yourself, right? Everybody knows the answer, right? Everybody already knows the answer. It's humiliating. Give me a take on their attempt to wrap the U.S. as a backstop, which is effectively the U.S. fighting the Russians because Russia is going to go after those British and French troops immediately. And this other secondary task of saying, okay, well, we can't get it through the front door. We can't get Trump to agree to this directly. So let's get him to go along with the deal, the mineral deal, as they call it. It's not a mineral deal. They shouldn't even call it a mineral deal. The thing includes pretty much everything coming out of the ground, short of crops. And it does so 50% of it for the foreseeable future. It is the most bizarre deal I've ever seen. But if we can get him to sign it, that by definition of signing it, the U.S. has a stake in Ukraine, a stake that they may defend against the Russians. So it's like, no, we can't get this through the front door because Trumpists keep telling us no. However, we may be able to get it through the back door of a trade deal and a mineral deal. How do you see this? Is that the way you see them trying to maneuver this? It seems like that's the strategy at play. We're going to try to get it through the front door. We can't get it through the front door. So now we're going to try to get it through the back with a mineral deal. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, it showed the naked economic interest that's really at play. And I think, yeah, Trump. I mean, for PR reasons, I mean, the public has, lost confidence in Ukraine. I think as an ally, they've seen, a lot see it as another Afghanistan. I mean, the U.S. has wasted hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars that are urgently needed. I mean, America, is falling apart in many places, and now they're cutting major, funding for things like public education and healthcare when there are already serious problems in those systems. So to have spent $300 billion on Ukraine, how did the public view this when they, and they were sold so many lies, lie after lie after lie. So I mean, Trump, I mean, had this image as a businessman, he's going to restore American prosperity. So the only way he can justify it is if we're getting, some wealth out of the Ukraine return. I mean, he also was discussing, I think that's one thing they were discussing with the Russians, an alternative mineral deal, because Russia is far richer. Russia is among the richest countries in natural resources in the world, and those resources have long been coveted by outside powers. Uh, and that would make sense. I mean, from an American point of view, if Trump could cut some kind of deal with Putin as far as minerals, and that would sell it quite well to a nationalistic base in the United States.
It would.
This growing U.S. Russian alliance. So I think that's a smart political tactic on his part. And as far as the Europeans, yeah, I think those leaders have lost confidence of world opinion and their
Mhm.
own people. I mean, they're so hawkish on Ukraine. And what have the Europeans got out of the Ukraine war? It's further contributed to European economic decline. I
Yeah.
mean, Russia, is a very rich country, and particularly in oil and gas. So, what's the point of isolating Russia? How did that benefit the Europeans? And it's a lost cause. I mean, there was a photo in a newspaper of a Ukrainian soldier with a Nazi insignia on his helmet. And this is where the billion of taxpayer money are going. I mean, these are right-wing extremists, fascists. They worship Stefan Bandera. And they've been bombing oil refineries in Russia. I have an article coming out today on the CIA's development of the Ukrainian drone program, so they can now, they have better drone. They've been striking into Moscow, destroying buildings in Moscow, carrying out attacks on Russian oil refineries. And I mean, what's the point of that? I mean, they're trying to cripple the Russian economy, but that doesn't benefit Europe. I mean, Russia's a great oil and gas supplier, and with the
Yeah.
Nord Stream pipeline, it would have brought cheap gas to Europe. So these leaders have betrayed their own people and support a totally dubious cause, and they're jokes. I mean, nobody respects them.
I understand why Trump is doing this. I get it. From his point of view, every time Zelensky comes to the US, he leaves with a bag of cash. That was something Trump said. He's right. But this is extortion. And it is mind-blowing what he is doing here. Like let's really put it in context, right? In 2008, at the Bucharest summit, you get the offer of NATO membership to Ukraine and to Georgia. Putin loses his mind over this because this is a red line. Like this is the reddest of red lines. William Burns write the memo, net means net, pointing out, look, Russia, this is going to create a civil war in Ukraine, one that Russia doesn't want to get involved in, but because it's happening on the border, they will be faced with the choice of having to get involved. All of that comes to pass. You get the Minsk agreements. Those get blown off. Angela Merkel, Hollande basically come out literally saying, we lied. We did these agreements only to allow time for Ukraine to build up a massive military. And again, all of this stuff is happening on the Russian border. Fast forward, war starts. Russia invades. You get the Istanbul agreements, where the U.S., pushed by Boris Johnson, just completely blows off. So you have a situation where a country gets overthrown in 2014, the Yanukovych government, by the U.S. So we are the aggressor in this. We overthrew the government. It wasn't like the government had an election and they moved in a particular direction. They were forcibly pushed in a particular direction with a band of Nazis at the head of that government used as the tip of the spear to overthrow that government. I'm trying to point out that all along this course, Ukraine was led down a particular pathway by Western powers that wanted to use it as a proxy to go after the Russians. The war starts. We drop in with $300 billion. Europe drops in 200 billion, 300 billion, whatever that number is, just ungodly sums of money. Much of that money comes back to the US in regards to weapon sales. Even money that Europe is putting in, much of it is coming to the US in regards to weapon sales that are being dumped into Ukraine. So all along the way, the US was able to take advantage, A, by breaking the connection between Europe and Russia. So Europe now has to buy more gas, 5 times the cost from the United States. The money that they spend in weapons is largely coming to the United States. All of this is done under the guise of Ukraine. Then for America, after pushing in this direction, America then turns around and says, A, we're pulling out. And B, we want 50% of oil, gas, rare earth minerals, and anything else that's coming out of your ground for the foreseeable future in order to compensate us for the war that we pushed you into. That is astonishing. That is that is mind-blowing when you think about that. Whatever is left of Ukraine, they've lost 20% of their territory. And now on top of that, 50% of whatever's coming out of the ground belongs to us. That is mind-blowing. That is hard. That is a reaming of epic proportions that Zelensky is agreeing to because he wants the US to be entangled militarily or economically into the country in a way that they would militarily, ideally, defend. I get why Trump is doing it, but Jesus Christ, am I seeing this right? Am I viewing this with the level of astonishment that I should be viewing it with, or am I getting something wrong in my assessment of this?
No, you're absolutely right, and that fits with a pattern of U.S. imperialism where they just use countries and basically totally destroy them, and that's what has happened with Ukraine. Yeah, they totally destabilized their country with this Maidan coup, provoked a war, got them to fight, used them as a pawn to try and weaken with the Russians. It more or less backfired because Russia was able to withstand the sanctions and was a lot stronger than they thought. And Ukraine is just left in ruins, as you say. I mean, the flower of their youth has been killed off. I read an article in the New York Times where youth were afraid, like teenagers were afraid, Ukrainians, afraid in Kiev to go to a concert because they were army kidnappers. And I think they were underage youth out to kidnap them to press gang them into the military. And their article in the New York Times all the time, because I read it every day, about widows, women who've lost their husbands. So I mean, Ukraine has just been used, and yeah, and now to add insult to the injury, they're saying, "Give us, we gave you all this money, so now we have to steal your minerals, but take all your minerals." But already Zelensky sold off a lot of Ukraine's land to Wall Street banks, and a company like Monsanto have made huge inroads into Ukraine. And this Ukrainian Reconstruction Agency, I don't know what will happen to it, but the Biden administration has set up a Ukrainian Reconstruction Agency to further turn over Ukraine's economy completely to Wall Street. But this fits with the pattern. And, Henry Kissinger once said, it's bad to be an enemy of the United States, but worse to be its friend. And I mean, look at a country like the now defunct South Vietnam. Its leaders allowed themselves to be used by the United States, and they were killed, and the country was turned into a hellhole. And they, faced retribution in the end from the communists. And that's happened in a lot of the country. I mean, the Hmong in Laos were enlisted to fight a secret war against the communists, and they got totally wiped out and then abandoned, and they had to recruit child soldiers. And then the U.S. doesn't care. Once they've lost their utility, they'll throw them out like yesterday's garbage. Imperialist countries have no morality whatsoever, and you can't imagine how they'll screw you over, use you, and screw you over. And that's why we need an anti-imperialist movement I mean, look at the history of the Native American. They signed treaties, with a smile, and then they never followed those treaties and just stole all the natives' land and treated them horrifically. So the pattern goes on, and they would lure certain natives, buy them off with gifts and alcohol, get them to fight as scouts, Kit Carson to help them to subjugate their own people, and then they would not really fall through on any promises of reward for them. And those were the worst people. Those people knew they sold out. I mean, that ought to be the worst feeling, that you're a traitor to your own people. You lied. You succumb to this allure of short-term wealth or gain to sell out your own people. And that's what Zelensky has done. He's a traitor. And there's karma in life. One way or another, he's not going to meet a good end, because he sowed the ruin of his own people, and he sowed a generation of youth to their death for his celebrity, and he'll face the consequence one day or another.
Speaking of Zelensky, so I hope this is the clip for it. Zelensky is saying, look, there are no security guarantees. I'm sorry, there's no ceasefire without security guarantees. This is him. I hope this is the clip that I want this clip to be, but we'll see. Right here, The Guardian is showing this. I don't know if this is in English. We will find out.
Може бути великий успіх
It
мати,
is not in English. Great.
або тихенько пройти.
Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on.
А великий успіх, я вважаю, залежить від нашої розмови з президентом Трампом. Безумовно, це про
Okay. That clip is going horribly. I don't know what is going on with YouTube on that clip. Either way, what he's saying in that clip is effectively, if we don't get security guarantees, there is no ceasefire. Clearly Zelensky is an impediment to any kind of peace deal. And it was coming out of the New York Post that people in the Trump admin were like, he needs to go to France. Basically, he needs to leave. I don't know why they picked France. I don't know why they didn't say Florida. But whatever. They was like, he needs to leave. He needs to go. He needs to get out. And Trump going after him effectively saying, look, he has 4% approval rate. And the man is a dictator. He needs to leave. So all of these people, even saying elections, is symbolic for Zelensky being taken out, because nobody believes he can win another election. How much of an impediment is he to peace? Like, is he really going to play this role of, I'm not going to accept a ceasefire if I don't get security guarantees? Does he have that clout? Does he have that power? Does he have that capability of being a fly in the ointment of any kind of peace deal? Or is he just going to be dictated terms? Is it going to be, we're going to make a deal with the Russians and you will be presented the deal that you need to sign? Where do you think he factors into this? How much clout does he have in gumming up the works of any kind of agreement made between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it seems, I mean, his government is entirely dependent on foreign aid. So if they're threatening to cut the foreign aid, or cutting it, then he had no choice but to accept the deal, because at that point, the only thing sustaining the fighting at this point is the billions in foreign weapons and foreign aid. I mean, they are running out of manpower, so it can't go on indefinitely. And I mean, the Western publics have tired of this conflict. So it's inevitable that they're not going to support continuously providing him with aid. So then the writing's on the wall. He had no choice but to flee the country and accept some kind of deal. And he would fit the classic definition of a puppet, because he's sustained by foreign aid and support. And I've never seen this pathetic display of the leader coming to continuously beg for more and more weapons and arms. And he claimed it to save his country, that in a war that he provoked with the U.S. and EU, and then these congressmen just fawn, kissing his feet and throwing away the national treasure into a sinkhole. I mean, that's the most it's rated in all the indexes as among the most corrupt countries in the world. And there are reports about a huge amount of those arms have been resold or stolen on the black market, and there have been incredible levels of corruption among his inner circle and in the government in Ukraine. And it's just an entirely corrupt apparatus. and and that's one reason the political establishment is so hated. I mean, America has serious problems, and they're not governing for the American people, and life is getting harder in America. The cost of living and public services are deteriorating and becoming more and more like a third world country. And then they give it to this two-bit dictator. They give him those billions of dollars, and it's money. It's stolen. You know, the money is complete waste. And they did this with Afghanistan as well. That war yielded nothing for America. The U.S. side lost ultimately, and it was billions and billions and billions. So it's amazing actually that the American public has allowed this charade to go on for so long, and not overthrown these leaders. I mean, we have a right. You know, Thomas Jefferson said we have a right to rebel against unjust and illegitimate power, and that is illegitimate power, squandering our national treasure on this foreign war that has no purpose, no chance of victory, and into a corrupt sinkhole when we have serious issues to deal with here. That is a betrayal of the public trust, and we need our public to rise up and get rid of these leaders who've done this. And I hope Trump is doing that. That's why they voted for him, a key reason, because
Mhm.
the Democrats were the most Russophobic, and there was no hope of ending this thing with Biden and Harris. So they hope with Trump. It may be wishful thinking, but I mean, I'll hope for the best as well.
Yeah, I hope for the best too. On the positive, it seems like Trump is trying to create a context to end it in the language that he's using. You know, this wasn't something that was ever going to be accepted. NATO was always a red line. Like his language has shifted in a way that would allow him to create the context to end it. Even when they go after him, saying, "Hey, aren't you just giving in to Putin?" Like the screaming headlines that come out. He's like, "Look, I just want the killing to stop. I want all these people to stop dying. That's what I want." What do you think? The media is harping, and I am too, on this thing. But the media is harping on this idea of what is Trump going to get from Putin in order to make this work? I'm fascinated by that question. God, I'm fascinated by that question. It's such a good question because the truth of the matter is you fundamentally lost the war. Like there's nothing that you can do short of going to nuclear war with Russia that would change the context of the ground. And even that is just going to be everybody dies. So it's like, what can you extract from Putin if the context of negotiations is purely the war? Which is the reason why I think the context of negotiations is going to go beyond the war. It has to, because there's nothing that Trump can really extract out of Putin specifically in the war that the US and NATO has lost. Give me your take on that. Are there concessions that are missing that Trump can extract from Putin where he can come out and save face with?
Well, I think, look, the United States is still a rich country. They may be a loser in this conflict, but I mean, the U.S. is still an all powerful country
Yeah,
with a buoyant economy. And all along, Putin, when he came in, he was the successor of Boris Yeltsin, and he wanted, a very good relation with the United States. He was not anti-American or anti-Western by any stretch. He was not a Marxist Leninist. I think he saw great opportunity in Russian alliance with the United States in many different areas, and I don't think his worldview has changed at all. So I think he
really,
sees an opportunity. Well, it has
really,
changed in response to particular policies, and he's adapted to the sanctions and the war. I mean, the U.S. essentially waged a war on him, and
right,
it's turned him, toward China. But I think deep down, I think he still sees, I mean, benefits in the United States. Maybe playing both camps. They're not going to cut their relation with China. I mean,
right.
Russia has forged really powerful economic relations that have boosted both countries' economy. That's not going to change, but I think he sees an opportunity, and his camp, I don't think. I think sees an opportunity in recultivating alliance with the United States and forging economic relations and deals. And I think there are business elements in the United States that have not been happy. And some of those are the business factions supporting Trump because they see great investment opportunities in Russia, and some of these are being curtailed by the Biden and the hardline anti-Russia policy. So I think a fruitful economic relationship, and in other areas, security guarantee. Don't forget the Russians are um, hostile toward Islamic fundamentalism, and I think Russia would see possibility for allying with the United States to fight Islamic extremism instead of like fighting each other like they were in Syria. So I think that's a lot of what Trump has taken into the negotiations, and that Russia wants that. So if they can agree with sensible terms for Ukraine, they can move into discussing other area of cooperation that I think Putin feel would be very good for the Russian population.
Yeah.
So
No, I get that, and that's fair. This is, Mark always talked about the worst aspects of Putin, um, whereas in the West they see him as this kind of strongman ogre, whereas Mark is like, dude, he's too much of a Europhile, that he's too much willing to make deals, and doesn't necessarily see the threat that the West posed in the way that it posed it, especially Ukraine being the
exactly,
kind of main thing, and
yeah,
that his you would think that he's been shattered from these illusions of continuously trying to make these kind of inroads. But I agree with you. I do think if he would prefer decent relationships with America, even if you have things that you disagree with, to have open lines of communication and you work on the things that you can work towards, like you said, Muslim fundamentalism, those type of things, and trade deals. I would imagine that they may not necessarily alter their economy in the way that they had it before, where they had all of these products coming in from the West. But if there's a deal to be made, they'll take it. So I agree with you on that. And I hope that that's where the relationship goes. I hate this idea that we're antagonistic. It's like we're not talking about a communist country. We're talking about a capitalist country. And so it's not even using this notion of communism as the boogeyman like it was with the Soviet Union. You're talking about another country that is very similar to your own. We have no issue with dictators. We deal with Saudi Arabia. We deal with Egypt. We deal with Bahrain. So that can't be it. Last question, Jeremy. I asked this when this first started. I said somebody is going to be staring at stars one day at night, and they're going to say, "What was this for? All of these people dying, all of this land being lost, almost bringing the world to nuclear conflict, which a Kamala Harris or extended Biden administration could have done, especially if they didn't have the ability to pull back. Because again, you set your context by the way you talk about stuff. And if he's a dictator, he's evil, he's the devil. I looked at him in his eyes, he's a killer. He is unprovoked war of aggression. Okay, well, how do you have an agreement and a deal with a guy who you've said all of this stuff about? There's no context. The language doesn't allow your action. It restrains you. In Trump's case, it's opposite. He's taking an opposite point of view. This was not unprovoked. This is more complicated than that. This was always going to be a red line. The language allows a particular set of actions that go along with the language. What was it for?
well, that's a very good question. Yeah, and firstly, yeah, related to what you were saying before, I think that's why this your points about Russia, it's not a communist country. That's why I think this new Cold War doesn't have the same emotional fervor as the original Cold War. Uh, and I think that's why the public, yeah, is kind of left scratching its head, and why the conflict in Ukraine is unpopular. And there is hope, and there is, I think, an opening that Trump seems to be moving into for an American leader to present himself as ending the new Cold War and recalibrating U.S. Russia relations in a positive way and focusing on commercial relations or anti terrorism. And they can sell that to the public. Where in the Cold War you had this emotional commitment to anti communism, and there was a religious aspect to it because of the atheistic aspect of communist ideology. As far as what is this all about? Well, I think it's part of the imperialistic scheming of the U.S. foreign policy establishment and power elite that more and more in the public are questioning, and the scheme involved using Ukraine as a pawn to weaken the Russians uh, because their goal is global domination. And Eurasia, Zbigniew Brzezinski was a key theorist for the neoconservatives and imperialists. and he wrote about the importance of Eurasia. And it's not really original thinking. If you look at British imperial thinkers and Nazi thinkers, they also placed a great priority on dominating Eurasia and its oil and gas resources. So the key is to weaken Russia, use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. So they orchestrated that coup, drew Russia into a trap, just like in the Afghan trap. And don't forget Brzezinski was the mastermind of the U.S. foreign policy strategy in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s, which bankrupted the Soviet Empire. And that's the exact strategy they used for Ukraine. But it's backfired this time because Putin was a smarter leader, and he was able, and things have changed, and Putin could rebalance the Russian economy more toward China and through import substitution. So the sanctions didn't have the intended effect of crippling the Russian economy. And they were using NED to stir the National Endowment for Democracy, which Trump has now cut, to spread propaganda about Putin and support the dissidents within Russia around Alexei Navalny. But Navalny was never a popular figure in Russia, and he was also tied in with skinhead groups, and he had an extreme anti-immigrant viewpoint. So he was not a figure and who had much support or credibility in Russia. And then he was personally corrupt and embezzled money, and he was, linked to British intelligence, seen as a foreign puppet. So that backfired, and the fighting in Ukraine didn't go that well either. The Russians took a lot of territory, so it hadn't worked well this time. But it was a shame to weaken Russia and dominate Eurasia. That's what it was all about.
Jeremy, man, I always appreciate you. You are a fountain of information. I deeply appreciate you for coming and joining me. Jeremy Kuzmarov, he is managing editor for Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. The man knows his stuff. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate this.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind words, and you know your stuff too.
I try. You have a good one, man. Be safe.
Okay, take care.
All right. Jeremy is a fantastic guest. I always appreciate him. He used to come on the show prior, and he's been nice enough to continue to join me on this one. Deeply appreciate him. The man knows his stuff on U.S. foreign policy. Definitely check him out if you get the opportunity. If I'm not mistaken, he's writing another one with someone else. I can't think of the name of it right now at the moment. Next time I talk to him, I'll try to get the information out of him. Well, wait, he's still here. Jeremy, what is the new book that you're writing? I'm sorry to bring you back on. That's why you're still floating background. What is the name of the new book that you're writing? You're a co-author on.
Yes, I'm writing a book with Dan Kovalik called Anatomy of Regime Change in Syria, and it's going to be published in September with Baraka Books, based in Montreal, Canada. But it
Excellent.
should be widely available. So, yeah, it's a dissection of the regime change operation in Syria, going back to the 1950s, when the CIA first was involved in coups in Syria, and then the 1980s when they started to try and undermine Hafez al-Assad and continue with Bashar. And some of the chapters, Dan Kovalik has spent a lot of time in Syria, so
Yeah.
some of the chapters will be written by him about his travels there and all the interviews he conducted that challenged the Western corporate media narrative about Syria, we've been told.
Explain that. What do you mean?
Well, just, I mean, the demonization, similar to what we've been discussing on the show about the demonization of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
There was a long-standing campaign to demonize the Assad
Government.
rulers in Syria. And, not to say they don't have a dark side or, they use coercion to rule. But on the other hand, there were a lot of accomplishments. Hafez al-Assad was compared to Charles de Gaulle by a noted biographer of his, a British journalist. And I mean, in Syria, there's a lot more respect for them, much like with Putin. I mean, I traveled in Russia, and I just talked to a lot of people about politics, and a lot of people said the same thing. I mean, they had certain criticism of Putin. They wanted things run better in certain ways,
Yeah.
but they said, look, we're a lot better than in the 90s with Yeltsin. And Putin, has restored our economy. Our economy going a lot better, And he was an authentic Russian leader, and that's the same as Assad. He's not a foreign puppet. And in light of what they've experienced, that's a major step forward.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are willing to stand by him. And it's the same in Syria. Assad stood up for Syria. The father really modernized the economy, and the quality standard of living improved considerably. And their Hafez, and they stood up to the Israelis, because the Israelis occupied the Golan Heights.
Right.
And that's of course a key reason they were targeted for regime change, is their alliance with the Soviet Union and Russia, standing up to Israel. So it's more about that, but they play up these human rights issue. But now the government in Syria, the new revolutionary government, is carrying out pogroms against the Alawite population. And
Yes.
from the beginning, there were signs of that. They had signs at these even original protests that were presented as pro-democracy uprising. They had signed like Alawites are dogs, and signed inciting hatred against the Alawite population, because Assad's were Alawites. But Assad's cultivated wide alliances. They brought in a lot of different groups into the government. So anyway, this and the U.S. ultimately allied with jihadist elements who've taken over the country now, and they committed so many horrific atrocities. And anyway, our book just looks at a lot of the U.S. policies to engineer regime change, including the National Endowment for Democracy, support for the
Hmm.
Syrian opposition, the Timber Sycamore covert operation of arms
Obama.
smuggling. Yeah. So we go into all that, and the sanctions was really key to the regime change, and that weakened over time. It weakened the population, and demoralized the population, and enabled these extremists to be able to
Take
ultimately
power.
take over.
Jeremy, man, thank you for this. You be safe. Have a good day, okay?
You too. Take care. Talk
All
to you
right.
soon.
Thank you.